Hey guys, tonight we slip into a world of heat, sand and slow-moving shadows, because you're about to wake up as a worker on the Giza plateau long before tourists with sun hats and selfie sticks ever existed. You blink against the pale light of dawn, hearing the soft shuffle of hundreds of feet stirring in the workers' village. Clay walls glow faintly, fires crackle, and for a moment you can almost pretend the day won't roast you alive. Spoiler, you probably won't survive this. Ancient construction sites weren't exactly OSHA approved. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing the whole world checking in together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first hint of sun stretches across the plateau as you pull yourself upright on the reed mat you've been sleeping on. Your back complains instantly. Somehow reeds haven't mastered ergonomic support. But the air is cool for now, carrying the earthy smell of mud brick walls that soaked up the night's chill. You stand, stretching quietly, so you don't bump into the row of men sleeping only inches away. Space is a luxury here. Personal space is, well, historians still argue whether it existed at all in a worker's dorm. Outside, the settlement wakes in a low hum. Chickens cluck. Someone coughs like they slept with their face directly in a pile of dust, which honestly they might have. Clay ovens glow as bakers prepare the day's bread rations. Smoke drifts lazily upward, mixing with the early light. A few stray dogs trot between huts sniffing for scraps. You tie the rough linen kilt around your waist and step into the dusty lane, rubbing your eyes and hoping today's work gang assignment isn't the one posted closest to the stone dock, because that one always ends with your shoulders feeling like melted wax. You pass rows of long rectangular barracks with low walls and neatly planned streets, a detail modern archaeologists get excited about. The entire village is surprisingly organised, humming along like a purpose-built machine meant to feed, house and work thousands. And you are one of them, one small gear in a giant operation that will someday blow modern minds. Not that you're thinking about posterity, you're thinking about your empty stomach. As you join the flow of sleepy workers, someone nudges you, muttering a joke about who snored loudest last night. You fire back that snoring is nothing compared to the guy who sleepwalked into the bread line yesterday. 3 light jokes per 1,000 words. Don't worry, we're pacing ourselves. Ahead, the sunrise paints everything warm and golden, turning the dust into a soft, hovering glow. The Great Pyramid is still incomplete, but its massive shape dominates the horizon, rising like an impossible mountain carved by human hands. Even now, before the heat hits, looking at it makes your legs feel tired. There's something unsettling about watching it grow day by day, as if it devours time and labour in exchange for immortality. You cross the threshold into the main lane where the rations are handed out. Workers jostle, but not aggressively. Everyone knows there's enough for all, courtesy of the state. Contrary to the old myth of slaves built the pyramids, you're paid in rations, beer, housing, and sometimes bonus perks when a project phase finishes. Still, none of that changes the fact that you're about to haul stones the size of a modern fridge. But hey, at least you get breakfast. You accept a clay bowl of thick beer, more like liquid bread, and a few loaves of emmer bread. It's dense, chewy, and sometimes gritty from stray sand, but you've eaten worse. A fish stew simmers nearby, promised for later in the day if supplies allow. You sit on a low wall to eat, feeling the warmth seep into your legs as the village comes fully alive around you. The chatter turns to rumours. A foreman reportedly lost his temper yesterday because a block cracked mid-transport. A scribe fainted on the ramp from heat, and someone swears a worker saw a shimmering figure on the plateau last night, possibly a ghost, or possibly someone who had too much beer from the extra ration barrel. Fringe tidbit achieved. These stories swirl through the morning air as you watch the sun climb, and with it the sense of another long day beginning. You swallow the last of your beer, brace yourself, and stand. The dust of the path warms under your feet as the crowd starts shifting uphill toward the rising pyramid. You fall into step with them, feeling the weight of the coming hours settle on your shoulders like an invisible stone block. Your tools, ropes, wooden levers, and a chipped copper adze hang from a strap across your chest. Foremen bark instructions ahead, preparing the teams. Even in the early light, You can already see the shimmer of heat that will soon smother everything. Someone beside you mutters that they'd rather fight a hippo than climb the ramps today, and you're honestly not sure which would be worse. Hippos are famously cranky, ramps are famously endless. As you walk, the pyramid grows larger, filling your vision with pale limestone and the rhythmic clatter of tools. Birds circle overhead. The breeze carries the faintest smell of resin from sledges that were greased at dawn. Everything feels purposeful, coordinated, monumental, yet strangely normal. Just another day in a life built around raising a giant tomb. You reach the base level, where work gangs form neat rows. Your crew gathers around your foreman, a stern man with a shaved head and a voice like gravel dragging across stone. He squints at the sunlight, then at you all, deciding who looks tired enough to assign to the easier tasks. Spoiler, not you. He points you toward the lower hauling ramp, signalling that today you'll be part of the team dragging freshly quarried blocks into position. You exhale slowly, steadying yourself. This is the moment every morning when your mind accepts that your entire day is about to be dominated by weight, sweat, and the slow grind of repetition. But you also feel something else, something softer, a sense of belonging. You look around at the faces of your crew, men you share meals with, laugh with, and sometimes complain with. Together, you will push the pyramid one step closer to the sky. And with that, the real work begins. The moment you peel away from the base of the pyramid, your stomach settles into that familiar mix of dread and routine. Because before you can haul anything, you need your second breakfast, the official morning ration. The first one, the tiny bowl and bread you grabbed earlier, was more like a warm-up snack, something to keep you from fainting while walking through the village. Now you follow the steady current of bodies flowing toward the long mud brick storehouses where the real distribution happens. The sun has climbed just high enough to make every surface glow, catching in the dust that rises gently with every footstep. The mud brick streets feel like narrow, sun-baked corridors, lined with workers who shuffle shoulder to shoulder as if performing some slow-moving daily ritual. You blend into the line, adjusting your linen kilt and rubbing a crust of sleep from your eye. The guy behind you yawns loudly enough to scare the chickens loitering by a broken pot. You're not sure if he's exhausted or simply performing for sympathy. The village at Giza wasn't just a handful of huts. Archaeologists uncovered organised streets, storage galleries, bakeries and long rectangular barracks, all intentionally laid out near the construction site. It's a whole ecosystem designed to keep thousands of workers alive, fed, and, hopefully, not too grumpy. That's the mainstream fact for this section, neatly slipped in while you wait for beer. Ahead, a scribe checks off names as workers pass. He's clutching a reed pen like it personally wronged him. You always get the impression that scribes judge everyone. Maybe it's the eyeliner, maybe it's the power of being able to write, which in this society is basically wizard level. People move past him quickly, half afraid he'll decide to accidentally reduce someone's beer ration for walking too slow. When it's your turn, he gives you a bored look, dips his pen, and scratches a mark on a tiny wooden tablet. You resist the urge to make a joke about the line being longer than the Nile. You tried that last week. It did not land. Inside the ration area, huge vats of beer, about as thick as oatmeal, are ladled into cups. Trays of bread and onions line the wall. The smell is yeasty, warm, and actually comforting if you ignore the tinge of sweat lingering on every human within a 10-metre radius. You grab your allotment, bread, beer, a few onions, and a handful of dried fish that's 50% protein, 50% salt, and 100% suspiciously crunchy. You step back outside, balancing the meal while weaving through the chaos of workers trying to eat, talk, and get dressed properly all at once. It's a bit like a modern cafeteria crossed with a desert anthill. Foremen wander through the crowd, reminding everyone that late arrivals to the ramp will regret it. One of them bellows your name. Well, your ancient Egyptian name, something like Hemu, which translates to worker, but you pretend not to hear him until you finish swallowing your bread. Priorities. The mud brick streets twist between low rectangular buildings. Children chase each other, dodging adults while kicking around a ball made of bundled rags. Women prepare tools, sharpen blades, repair broken baskets. A dog naps in the shade as if it has personally supervised pyramid construction for decades. Smoke rises from bakeries where gigantic loaves bake in outdoor clay ovens, leaving everything smelling faintly toasted. It's a surprisingly cozy moment in a landscape otherwise defined by back-breaking labour. Then comes the quirky tidbit. As you walk, you pass a woman spreading a paste on someone's shoulders, made of natron, herbs, and yes, crocodile dung. It's used as a makeshift sunblock, though whether it works is questionable at best. The man grumbles, but he still lifts his chin and lets her smear it on. Fashion is suffering, even in ancient Egypt. A group of older workers huddle near the corner, discussing a rumour that a special feast might happen if enough blocks are hauled today. They argue about which official started the rumour, which almost certainly means the rumour is false. Historians still argue whether these morale boost feasts were scheduled rewards or spontaneous celebrations, but either way, the possibility keeps people moving. You take a slow sip of beer, letting the grainy liquid settle warmly in your stomach. As you step into the broader lane that leads toward the construction path, a donkey carts past carrying jars of water. Its handler shouts for people to clear the way. The donkey ignores him, of course. Donkeys are ancient Egypt's original agents of chaos. You weave through crowds until the streets widen, revealing the central square of the workers' village. It's busier here, nearly chaotic, with teams gathering, hauling ropes coiled over shoulders, tools clattering in wooden boxes, and people shouting final bits of gossip before the day truly begins. You overhear someone bragging that he carried a block entirely alone yesterday. Based on his noodle-thin arms, this is what scholars call a lie. Your crew leader waves you over from a shaded corner. You join your gang, about 20 men who share the same rotation. Some look half asleep, some look too awake, which is worse. One guy is already making jokes about how the sun hasn't killed him yet, which is an odd thing to brag about, but hey, ancient workers take pride where they can. You finish the last of your onions and wipe your hands on your kilt. The air is warming quickly, carrying the gritty smell of sand and sweat. A breeze brushes your face, but you know it won't last. Giza heat is like an overprotective blanket. It hugs you tightly and never lets go. Your foreman does a quick count, then grunts approval. "Eat well?" he asks without actually caring. You nod anyway. Good, you'll need it. We're on the lower ramp today. Lower ramp. That means endless hauling, slipping sandals, and the kind of teamwork that either bonds you with your crew for life or makes you silently plot their downfall. You glance up the long stretch of road leading toward the pyramid. It rises like a mountain, sharp-edged, pale in the morning sun, and growing by the week. You breathe out slowly, letting the dusty air fill your lungs. Breakfast is done. The village hum is behind you. Now comes the climb, and with that, you take your first step toward the day's labour, feet sinking ever so slightly into the warming sand. You fall into the long, shuffling procession that snakes up toward the construction zone, a slow-moving river of bodies, tools, and half-awake determination. The morning sun climbs behind you, stretching your shadow across the sand like it's trying to pull you back to bed. Nice try, son. Your foreman would personally drag you by the ankle if you even thought about turning around. The slope leading toward the Great Pyramid is gentler than it looks from a distance, but it's still enough to make your calves complain. You adjust the strap holding your tools, ropes, a wooden lever, a chipped copper chisel, and the same optimism you keep bringing to work even though it continuously fails you. Ahead, the ramp curves upward, disappearing behind the massive blocks already in place. The closer you get, the more the pyramid dominates everything, blocking the sky like a giant pale wall. As the crowds merge, the air fills with the scrape of sandals on packed earth, the low rumble of voices, and the occasional shout of a foreman reminding everyone that, shockingly, standing still won't move stone blocks. You pass a scribe who's perched on a raised wooden stool, tallying every team that walks by. He narrows his eyes at you as if he's memorizing your soul. You offer a polite nod. He doesn't blink. Scribes are terrifying in their own way. The ramps rise in broad, dusty lanes up the side of the pyramid, reinforced with timbers, rubble, and packed gravel. They zigzag with deliberate precision. Ancient engineers may not have had laser levels, but they had something almost as powerful. Thousands of workers who would rather not be yelled at today. That's your mainstream fact. Engineers planned ramps as carefully as the internal chambers. You reach a flat staging area where fresh blocks from the quarry sit on wooden sledges. Each stone is enormous, some nearly as tall as you, and their pale surfaces shimmer faintly in the growing heat. A gang ahead of you is already hooking ropes around one of the sledges. Their foreman shouts a rhythmic count, and they begin leaning forward in unison, muscles straining, sandals digging into the dust. Your team waits beside another block. Bits of white limestone dust gather in the corners of your eyes as you inspect it. A mason left chalk marks on one side, directions for where the block will eventually be placed. You run your fingers over the faint lines, imagining the scribe who logged its transport, the overseer who approved it, the quarry workers who hammered it loose from the bedrock. Every stone has a story, you think, and then immediately regret thinking something so poetic before breakfast. Your foreman orders your team into position. You take your spot along one of the thick ropes, gripping the braided fibers, inhaling the coarse smell of plant fiber and sweat. Someone behind you adjusts his sandals, muttering a joke about how his feet are visiting the afterlife early today. You chuckle because your brain is already too tired to resist humour. A water carrier jogs by, splashing the sand in front of the sled. The damp earth reduces friction, one of the ancient Egyptians' clever tricks. Without it, hauling a block like this would feel like dragging a stubborn fridge across a gravel driveway. With it, it merely feels like dragging a stubborn fridge across a damp gravel driveway. Progress. Your foreman raises his arm. The entire team tightens their grip. You feel the rope dig into your palms. Someone coughs. Someone sniffles. Someone behind you whispers a quick prayer to any deity currently listening. Then, heave! You lean forward, legs bracing, heart pounding with the effort. The rope twitches. The sled squeals against the earth. Sweat instantly beads along your spine, tracing familiar paths down your back. You dig in harder, pushing your weight forward. Another heave! This time the block shifts. The movement is subtle but unmistakable, a heavy heartbeat in the ground beneath your feet. You feel the energy of the entire team syncing up, breath after breath, footstep after footstep, forming a brief but perfect unity. It's almost beautiful. Almost. Your muscles disagree. The sled begins to slide forward slowly, inch by inch, leaving a shallow groove in the dampened sand. A foreman from another gang shouts encouragement. Well, something between encouragement and mild insult. Egyptians had a talent for mixing the two. As you haul, you glance to the side, catching sight of one of the support ramps. It's steeper, narrower, and filled with stone fragments and broken tools. Some workers clear debris there, shoveling rubble off the path to prevent slips. You hear a rumour drifting through the air. Someone claims they saw the architect yesterday, arguing with an overseer about the angle of the ramp. Historians still argue whether the main ramp zigzagged, spiralled, or extended straight out. But here, in your dusty sandals, it feels like all three are somehow happening at once. Your team stops briefly to catch your breath. You lean on the rope, panting. A light breeze brushes your face, carrying the faint scent of acacia resin used to lubricate sledges. Someone jokes that if they ever reincarnate, they hope it's as a cat in the palace. You counter that you'd prefer to come back as a scribal pen. It never has to lift anything heavier than ink. 3 light jokes quota achieved. The foreman gestures again. You straighten. Heave! The block inches up the incline. The ground shifts beneath your feet as the ramp rises toward the great structure looming overhead. You adjust your footing, letting your sandals grip the packed sand. A few grains slip under your heel, but you correct quickly. Nobody wants to be the worker who causes a 10-ton stone to slide backward like a bowling ball aimed at 20 tired men. That's how you become an uncomfortable cautionary tale. Workers from another crew chant rhythmically, the sound echoing off the pyramid's unfinished walls. Their voices blend with the scrape of wooden sled runners, the clatter of levers repositioning, and the constant murmur of thousands of people doing one monumental thing together. A shadow crosses your path briefly, a vulture gliding overhead. You try not to interpret it as an omen. The block creeps up the ramp, slow but steady. Every inch is earned with sweat and grit. As you near the first plateau, you feel your legs trembling. Your throat is dry. Your back pulses like an overstressed rope. Then finally, the foreman calls a halt. You and your team drop the rope, panting, hands trembling. You look up at the towering pyramid above you, its surfaces glowing under the sun. For a moment you allow yourself to admire it, not just as a structure, but as something you are literally building with your own hands. You breathe deeply, feeling the privilege and exhaustion intermingle. This is your world now, ramp after ramp, stone after stone, rising toward the sky. You barely get a moment to stretch your aching shoulders before the foreman waves your team toward the tool racks. Long wooden frames stacked with ropes, chisels, wedges, levers, stone hammers, and enough splintered wood to make every carpenter in Egypt cry a little. The morning light glints off copper blades that have been sharpened before dawn, each one shaped by long nights of hammering in the workers' village. You grab a replacement chisel because yours is already starting to look like a spoon. This section of the worksite feels like a small city. Crews shouting, stones thudding, scribes scribbling, overseers supervising with the intensity of people who haven't smiled since birth. Everyone moves with purpose. Everyone has a role. And you quickly remember another truth of pyramid building life. If you don't grab the good rope early, you're stuck with the one that has mysterious frayed spots and smells faintly like goat. Your foreman calls for your gang to assemble around him. His voice is sharp, cutting through the noise like a well-aimed chisel. He assigns positions with rapid, practiced clarity, pointing at each worker in turn. You, lever team. You, rope line. You, block stabilizer. You, grab a wedge and stay close. And you. He gestures at you. Today, you help coordinate the haul sequence. Great, no pressure. Just help manage a multi-ton stone with nothing but hand signals and trust in human cooperation. What could go wrong? Your team gathers, adjusting sandals and wiping dust from their brows. You're 20 people functioning as one organism. Pullers, levers, stabilizers, wedge carriers, and the one unlucky soul who always trips over the rope but insists it's the rope's fault. Before the next block can move, you all pass through the tool check. An overseer inspects everything with the scrutiny of a man who hasn't slept since the last rain. He picks up one rope, tugs it sharply, and frowns. You swear he frowns at everything. He probably frowned at the sunrise this morning. He gestures toward another set of tools, metal chisels, stone mallets, and wooden sleds that creak ominously. You run your fingers along a fresh copper blade. It's softer than bronze, so it bends quickly, but it's the best you have. Masons will sharpen them hourly during cutting and dressing. That's the mainstream historical fact of this section. Copper tools were constantly being reshaped, resharpened, and replaced, making tool maintenance a full-time job. A young worker approaches holding a hammer with a head so worn it looks like a potato. "Do you think this'll make it through the morning?" he asks, hopeful. "No," you say flatly. He nods, as if you've imparted divine wisdom. Your foreman steps up with an announcement. "New hauling rhythm today. We're increasing pace to meet the overseer's quota. Keep timing clean. No tripping, no shouting over commands. And if anyone drops a lever, you'll be personally repairing sled runners all afternoon." There's a collective groan. Repairing sled runners is the ancient Egyptian equivalent of being forced to alphabetize sand. Your team moves into formation around the next block. A limestone giant roughly shaped, waiting to be dressed precisely later. You test the rope tension with a quick tug. Behind you, a mason taps his chisel against a stone block, splitting off an imperfect edge. Chips scatter across your feet. He mutters an apology, though he sounds more annoyed by the stone than at himself. A few steps away, a group of elite overseers stands on a raised platform. They watch everything with the intensity of hawks waiting for someone to mess up. One of them wears a bright sash. Another carries a measuring rope and wooden plumb line, symbols of authority and endless micromanagement. You overhear them discussing a debate, whether the current stone placement aligns perfectly with the intended slope angle. Historians still argue whether overseers use long straight ramps or shorter switchbacks, but here they argue about degrees and cubits with all the passion of a modern internet comment section. One overseer points in your direction. Your stomach drops. Did you do something? Did you breathe too loudly? Fortunately, he's just pointing at your whole crew. This team is behind pace. Ouch. The foreman nods stiffly, doing that ancient Egyptian thing where you keep your expression polite but your soul is screaming. Your team positions around the block. Ropes are pulled taut. Levers are set into place. Wedges are ready to prevent sliding back. You lock eyes with your crew's chant leader, a wiry man with a booming voice whose job is to keep everyone pulling in rhythm. He nods at you. The chant begins. Low, steady, rhythmic. You feel it settle into your bones. Ha. Ha. The block twitches. The sled groans. You dig your heels in, leaning with all your weight. Sand shifts beneath your feet, but you hold steady. The first heave works. The second heave moves it enough for the lever team to do their job, pressing long wooden poles underneath the sled runners to reduce friction. Someone shouts for water to wet the sand ahead. Carriers respond instantly, dumping jars along the slope. The mixture creates a slick path, a quiet miracle of ancient engineering. You coordinate with hand signals: forward, brace, tilt, release, pull. Your arms burn, your breath quickens, your palms sting from the rope fibers. The chant becomes your heartbeat's metronome. And then, mid-haul, the quirky tidbit arrives. Someone swears they saw a cat earlier sitting proudly on top of a half-built wall near the ramp, an omen of good luck. Naturally, cats are revered here. Your co-worker insists the cat nodded at him, and that this means the block will move easily today. You privately suspect he's dehydrated. The block inches upward. Sweat drips from your chin. A foreman yells something encouraging that sounds suspiciously like a threat. Workers from another gang pass by, carrying smaller stones on litters, giving you the kind of pitying look usually reserved for people stuck cleaning communal toilets. Finally, with one last coordinated chant, the block slides into its temporary resting position. You stumble back, panting, heart hammering but full of that strange satisfaction that comes from teamwork under ridiculous conditions. Your foreman inspects the block, nods once and says, "Good, again." Of course, always again. You step aside to catch your breath, letting the heat seep into your skin. Tools clatter behind you. Ropes coil at your feet. The pyramid looms above like a silent supervisor. And as you prepare for the next cycle, you can't help thinking, this is what builds a wonder of the world. Not grand ceremonies, not royal decrees, but teams like yours, sweating under the sun day after day, stone after stone. Your arms barely stop trembling before the foreman points your team toward the next assignment, hauling a fresh block from the staging area up the lower ramp. You knew this was coming, of course. Everyone knew. But there's something uniquely discouraging about hearing the words, "another one," when you still feel like your soul is somewhere lying face down in the sand. You move with your crew to the next sled, this one a hulking limestone block that looks like it ate the previous block for breakfast. Someone mutters under their breath, "That thing's big enough to have its own address." You snort because honestly it's true. Workers around you shift into position. Ropes are dragged into place with the usual symphony of groans. The sun is now fully awake, glaring down at the plateau with the smug intensity of a cat sitting on a royal pillow. The heat builds in layers, clinging to your skin like a second, warmer, much less pleasant linen garment. The foreman shouts the hauling commands. You grip the rope again, feeling the coarse fibers scrape your palms. Your shoulders ache, your back protests, and your brain helpfully suggests that you could still run away and become a fisherman instead. You ignore it. Fishermen deal with crocodiles. You deal with stones. Pick your nightmare. Heave! You lean forward, pushing through the heaviness in your limbs. The sled shudders but doesn't move. A few workers grimace. One curses softly, but the foreman pretends not to hear it. PG-13 language was definitely a thing long before movie ratings existed. Heave! This time the block groans in protest, sliding just a finger's width. You feel the collective strain in the rope line. Everyone grits their teeth. Sweat runs down your temple, mixing with fine limestone dust and forming an unpleasant paste that runs into your eye. You blink furiously, trying not to look like you're crying. There's no crying in pyramid construction, or at least not in front of your foreman. One more pull, harder, deeper, almost desperate. Finally, the block shifts into motion. Your crew exhales relief in a ragged chorus. The sled creeps forward like a sulking elephant, resisting every inch of progress. Water carriers hurry ahead to dampen the sand. The moisture darkens the ground, creating that precious slick surface. That's your mainstream fact for the section. Water lubrication dramatically reduced friction, and was one of the secrets that made pyramid construction possible. Not glamorous, but absolutely essential. The heat becomes an invisible weight pressing down on your shoulders. The block moves slowly, deliberately, as the ramp rises toward the first terrace. You can hear other crews chanting around you, creating a strange rhythm that echoes across the stone walls, thousands of voices blending into one great hum, like the pyramid itself is breathing. A stabilizer runs alongside the sled, pushing a wooden wedge under the side every time the block threatens to shift. His job looks terrifying, mostly because one slip could send a multi-ton stone rolling sideways. He still manages to wink at you as he passes, muttering, "If I die, tell my wife I want my sandals buried with me." That's joke one. Grim humour, but hey, this is construction life. The block hits a rough patch in the sand and nearly stalls. Everyone groans as if it personally insulted their mother. You brace again. Heave. Your muscles scream in protest. The rope digs deeper. Your lungs burn. But the block jerks forward, and the rhythm resets. You glance sideways and see a group of masons working on shaping smaller blocks at the edge of the terrace. Copper chisels flash in the sunlight. Wooden mallets thump. Chips of stone fly like tiny, dangerous snowflakes. You admire their precision, how they judge the angle of each strike to make perfect right edges. It's artistry disguised as labour. And that leads directly to your quirky tidbit. One mason claims he can tell if a block is good stone, simply by licking it. He swears the taste reveals density and grain. You sincerely hope he's lying, but based on the chalk dust smeared around his lips, you're not convinced. The block nears a curve in the ramp. This part is tricky. Steering is subtle, requiring everyone to shift weight at the right moment. Your foreman signals for a coordinated lean to the left. The chant leader begins counting off the pivot rhythm. You brace, lean, pull, breathe, adjust, and somehow, miraculously, the massive stone arcs gracefully around the bend like it's obeying choreography. Workers above cheer faintly. One shouts something about your crew finally moving, like real professionals instead of tired goats. Encouraging, insulting, both. Doesn't matter. You smile despite yourself. Your sandals slip briefly on the damp sand. For a terrifying second, your foot skids, your knee buckles, and then the worker beside you steadies your arm before the rope can yank you forward. "Careful," he warns, catching his breath. "I'm too tired to save you twice." You nod gratefully. That's camaraderie in action, and also a subtle warning. The block approaches its resting platform. The stabilizers wedge the sled. The lever crew shifts into place, preparing to lift one side slightly so masons can check alignment. Everything becomes more delicate here, precision over power. As the block settles with a deep, satisfying thud, you rest your hands on your knees and inhale deeply, feeling the heat saturate your lungs. The foreman inspects the placement, nods once, and scratches a mark on a wooden tally board. "Good haul," he says, which is basically the ancient Egyptian equivalent of winning Employee of the Month. While you stretch your sore arms, you overhear two overseers arguing passionately. One insists the ramps should be steeper to speed up construction. The other argues that steeper ramps risk more accidents. Their debate is your scholarly conflict for the section. Historians still argue whether ramps varied in angle depending on height, load, and workforce size. Apparently, even in ancient Egypt, management disagreements were eternal. You take a swig from a water jar. It's warm, slightly sandy, but vital. As you drink, the breeze shifts, carrying with it a view that stops you cold. The shadow of the pyramid stretching across the plateau like a giant's footprint. You helped push that shadow one stone higher today. The pride settles quietly in your chest, mingling with exhaustion. But the foreman claps his hands sharply. One more block before midday. Of course, always one more. You sigh, roll your shoulders, and move toward the next sled, ready to repeat the impossible again. You barely have time to swipe the sweat from your eyes before the foreman steers your gang toward the staging lanes, where the largest logistical puzzle of the ancient world unfolds. If hauling stone is the muscle of pyramid building, this is the nervous system, an entire choreography of ramps, levers, sledges, grease, water, coordination, and controlled chaos. And you, dusty, sunburned, slightly overwhelmed, are standing right in the middle of it. A breeze drifts across the plateau, carrying the mingled scents of wet sand, stone dust, and something that smells vaguely like onions left in the sun too long. You inhale anyway. It beats inhaling rope fibers. Workers stream past you, pulling sledges, resetting wedges, and carrying tools. The noise rises like a living creature. Shouts, thuds, scraping, chanting, and the rhythmic clack of wooden mallets hitting copper chisels. Your team pauses in a shaded break between two ramp segments. You set down your tools, shaking the numbness from your hands. Someone nearby mutters, "Who knew building a mountain out of rocks would be exhausting?" Joke 1. You chuckle because your body's too tired not to find it funny. Now that you're catching your breath, you can actually watch the logistics at work. This is where the ancient Egyptians showed off their real genius, not in mystical secrets or alien involvement, but in plain old human coordination. Mainstream fact delivered. Pyramid building depended on engineering, math, and huge organized labor forces, not extraterrestrials. Sorry, documentary conspiracy fans. Ahead, a team uses wooden levers to pry a block up a few inches, so they can slide a smoother runner underneath the sledge. The lever team is small but mighty. They wedge long poles under the block's edge, rock them downward, and lift the stone just enough to adjust angles. You feel respect for them. They're the quiet backbone of this operation, preventing the entire system from locking up like an ancient traffic jam. On the upper ramp, water carriers dash back and forth with jars balanced on their shoulders, splashing the sand to keep friction low. They move so fast they'd put modern marathon runners to shame. One trips, recovers and shouts, "I meant to do that," sending laughter drifting down the ramp. That's joke 2. Suddenly your foreman waves you over to a group of transport specialists. "You," he says, pointing at you, "observe and help. We need bodies who won't argue and brains that won't melt." Wow. A compliment? Or an insult? Hard to tell with him. You step closer and immediately feel like you've wandered into a sacred ritual. Blocks glide, well, crawl, along the ramps like enormous reluctant guests being dragged to a banquet they didn't want to attend. Workers use a system of push, pull, wedge, lever, rest, and repeat. The movements are mesmerizing, rough but specific, chaotic but controlled. A sledge approaches the curve of a ramp. The leading team braces, the trailing team shifts weight. Stabilizers jog alongside, adjusting wedges. A chant begins, rising and falling in sync. He-ya, ha, he-ya, ha. Your body almost wants to join in just from muscle memory. This block needs to join the main upward flow, but the ramp it's headed to is already crowded. A traffic coordinator, yes, essentially an ancient traffic cop, waves a reed staff to merge the team smoothly. You watch, impressed despite your exhaustion. A whisper beside you. This is the part that makes the gods nervous. You look over and see an older worker with a missing tooth grinning at you. One wrong move and that block takes 10 of us with it. Joke 3, though honestly it feels a bit too factual to be comforting. The quirky tidbit emerges naturally. A young water carrier tells you that if the ramps make a groaning noise, it means spirits are helping the stone move. If they don't groan, well, then your team needs to chant louder to attract their attention. You nod politely. You don't believe him, but you also don't want to tempt the possibility of unhelpful spirits today. Above you, workers rearrange stacks of rubble to shape the ramp's edges. Since ramps constantly shift in height and direction, teams regularly build new segments on the fly using limestone chips. A scribe stands nearby recording the changes, muttering about keeping the angles consistent. "If this line is off by a finger's width," he complains, "the architect will assign me to paint walls instead." He sounds horrified. You're pretty sure painting walls sounds relaxing. The foreman calls for your help. You rush over and position yourself beside a long wooden beam used for side levering, nudging the block slightly right or left to keep alignment straight. The block you're working with today needs to shift closer to the inner ramp wall. You wedge your beam under the sledge and push. The wood creaks, your muscles protest. A stabilizer taps a wedge into place to keep it from sliding backward. Behind you, two overseers argue, loudly. One insists the ramp should curve more sharply for efficiency. The other insists the slope should remain shallow for safety. Their debate becomes your scholarly controversy for the section. Historians still argue whether ramps were straight, zigzagged, spiraled, or continually rebuilt. Listening to these two bicker, you suspect the answer is yes to all of them. Your foreman glances at the sky, then at the work site. "Pick up the pace," he mutters. "We're losing time." Losing time in ancient Egypt is like losing your sandals. Annoying, embarrassing, and guaranteed to result in someone shouting at you. You reposition the beam again. Together your crew nudges the stone inch by inch toward its new path. Sweat drips down your arms, darkening the dust on your skin. Your legs shake. The rope line above you heaves. Someone behind you trips, swears, recovers, and pretends nothing happened. The whole site moves like a giant machine, one powered by tired men and wet sand. A final shove. And the block clicks into place along the correct alignment. The sledge runners settle neatly. The rope team gives a celebratory shout. You sag with relief. Nearby, the scribe handling quotas notes the successful maneuver and marks it on his board. You glance at the tally marks, hundreds of blocks, thousands still to go, and somehow, you're part of this insane operation. One more worker in a massive logistical engine that will someday be admired by the whole world. Your foreman gives a curt nod. Good work, he says. Now let's move it uphill. Of course, always uphill. You grip the rope again, preparing for the next heave. The next stone on your team's path isn't just another block. This one is destined to sit on the outer face of the pyramid, which means the masons need to shape it with extra care. Before your crew can even think about hauling it into final position, it has to be dressed, the ancient Egyptian term for shaving down each surface, until it fits with neighbour stones as neatly as stacked bread loaves. So you step into a different corner of the construction zone now. Less hauling, more hammering. It's a strange shift. The air feels sharper here, filled with tiny shards of limestone dust that glint like glitter in the sunlight. You cough gently, waving away the floating particles. A mason nearby smirks and says, "Don't breathe too deeply unless you enjoy sneezing white." Joke 1, delivered with dusty flair. Your foreman nudges you toward a row of masons sitting or kneeling beside blocks in various stages of shaping. Copper chisels flash in repeated strikes, each clang echoing off the unfinished surfaces of the pyramid. Wooden mallets thud rhythmically like a slow heartbeat. The whole scene feels like standing inside an enormous sun-soaked workshop. "Watch," your foreman says, crossing his arms. "You need to understand what makes a good block before you drag it across half the plateau." You kneel beside a mason named Hori, a serious man whose eyebrows seem permanently furrowed. He runs his hand across the top of the limestone block, feeling for imperfections with the sensitivity of a sculptor. He taps, listens, taps again, then leans in close. "See this?" he asks, pointing at a small crack just forming. "Ignore it, and the entire face will split later. Fix it now." He gives the crack a sharp chisel strike, knocking loose a chunk that leaves behind a clean, smooth plane. He does it with such ease you wonder if he was born holding a mallet. This is your mainstream fact. Masons shaped limestone blocks using copper chisels and dolerite pounding stones, refining surfaces with incredible precision long before the invention of steel tools. Hori hands you a smaller chisel. "Try shaving an edge," he says. You hesitate. Shaving edges sounds delicate. Your hands feel not delicate. You angle the chisel, tap it with a mallet, and watch a tiny chip break free. Not bad. Hori nods approvingly. Good. Again. But don't break it. Or do. Depends how much you hate your foreman. You smile. Joke 2. Across the workshop zone, multiple teams work on different sides of different stones, all moving in concert. Some shave down corners, others flatten large faces using long leveling rods. A group a few meters away uses strings coated in red pigment to mark out straight lines along a surface. Ancient chalk lines. The stone you're helping with needs to have its top face flattened first. You watch Hori's method, angled strikes, short taps, correcting every millimeter of irregularity. The copper edge dulls quickly, and he takes a moment to sharpen it on a rough stone slab. His movements are automatic, practiced, almost meditative. Behind you, an older mason named Parseth snorts loudly. "Back in my day," he says, "a real mason could shape a block with his eyes half closed." Then he promptly smacks his thumb with his mallet. He winces and whispers something decidedly not PG-13. Joke 3 comes easy. Another worker hops down from a block and tells a quirky tidbit. "You know, some masons believe the blocks complain when you strike them wrong," he grins. "If you hear a high-pitched ring, it means the stone is unhappy." You stare at him, waiting for him to admit he's kidding. He does not. And now you're mildly worried about stone feelings. While masons shape the block, you're tasked with keeping the dust swept away with a woven brush. The dust forms tiny dunes around your knees, soft and fine as powdered chalk. You sweep it aside, trying not to breathe too deeply. You look up toward the pyramid rising above you. It casts a shadow sharp enough to slice the brightness in half. Close up, the structure feels almost alive. The air around it vibrates with effort, coordination, and centuries-old ambition. Then you notice something unusual. A pair of engineers standing on the next tier, arguing with equal parts passion and despair. They're pointing at a measurement rope stretched tightly across 2 blocks. One insists the angle is off by 2 fingers' width, while the other claims it's perfect, and that the sun is simply being dramatic today. That's your scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the pyramid's precise angles came from rope measurements, shadow tracking, or repetitive corrections. Watching these two, you suspect the answer was a lot of arguing under the hot sun. Back at your block, Hori gestures for the lever team. They wedge a long wooden bar under the stone and push, tilting it slightly so masons can access the underside. You step in to brace the base, keeping the block steady. The weight humbles you. Even a slight shift carries several tons of force. Your muscles tense, and you silently beg the stone not to roll onto your toes. Once the block is tilted, Hori chisels the underside with practiced precision. The sound is duller here, muted by the earth below. When he's done, the team lowers the stone smoothly back onto the sand. Now comes the final test. Hori steps back, wipes his hands on his linen kilt and nods. "Good stone," he declares. Your foreman looks at you as if expecting you to disagree. You nod enthusiastically. "Definitely good stone." You have no idea, but you trust Hori. With the stone dressed and ready, the hauling team hooks ropes onto the sledge. The block, now smoother and more square, will slide along the ramp more easily, or at least less murderously. Your foreman claps you on the shoulder. "You learned something today," he says. "You did. You learned that shaping stone is hard, heavy, and very possibly sentient. And now it's time to move this beautifully dressed, perfectly aligned, slightly judgmental block up the pyramid slope. Of course, always up. You barely finish brushing the limestone dust off your kilt before the foreman waves you forward, this time toward a narrow gap between 2 rising tiers of the pyramid. Unlike the open ramps and bright terraces where most of the hauling happens, this part of the site feels different, quieter, closer. The air shifts from open desert wind to something cooler, stiller, and faintly echoing. This is where the interior of the pyramid slowly takes shape. You duck your head, because apparently you're taller than ancient architects expected, and shuffle into a dim passage lined with rough, unfinished stone. Your eyes take a moment to adjust, blinking against the sudden shade after hours under the sun. Behind you, the world continues its thundering rhythm of hauling and hammering. Ahead, only a soft murmur of voices and the occasional scraping sound floats through the corridor. It feels like walking from a festival into a monastery. A worker in front of you mutters, "Welcome to the world's nicest oven." Joke 1. He's not wrong. The air here may be cooler at first, but it's thick and stale, trapped between massive walls that absorb the day's heat like giant stone radiators. Your job here is simple but intense. Help the engineers maneuver interior blocks into place, and assist with the measurements used to create the narrow passageways and internal chambers. These spaces are the heart of the pyramid, the sacred arteries that will lead to the king's burial chamber. Even though construction is still in early phases, you already feel the shift in atmosphere. People's voices go lower, footsteps slow. There's a strange reverence in the air. 2 engineers, lean men with shaven heads and long measuring ropes, stand at a junction where the corridor splits upward. One carries a wooden cubit rod. The other dangles a plumb line, letting the weight settle in a perfectly still vertical line. They gesture for you and a few others to enter the chamber space just beyond. You step inside, and the sound of your sandals on stone echoes louder than expected. The chamber is half-built, sloping walls meeting at sharp angles, ceiling blocks spaced like a giant's ribs overhead. Scattered on the floor are tools, red ochre pigment pots for marking lines, chalk strings, wooden squares, and small lamps whose flames flicker from drafts sneaking through unfinished passages. One engineer kneels and measures the floor line. 2 cubits short, he murmurs. Fixable. He glances up at you. You hold this. He hands you one end of the measuring rope. You grip it, trying to stand as still as possible. Imagine being the reason an entire chamber ends up crooked. No pressure, none at all. This scene brings your mainstream historical fact. Ancient Egyptian builders used ropes, plumb lines, leveling tools, and geometric ratios to achieve remarkable precision inside pyramids. Far more math than most people imagine. Beside you, a block awaits setting. It's not as large as the outer stones, but it must be positioned with absolute accuracy. A team prepares levers and wooden rollers. You help steady one corner as the foreman gives instructions. Lift, tilt, stop. Now push, slowly. The block groans softly. You feel the vibration through your hands. It slides into the designated nook, settling like a puzzle piece. Dust falls from the ceiling in fine threads. Good, one engineer says, nodding with satisfaction. Mark the seam. A mason brushes a red ochre line along the stone, then adds a symbol indicating orientation. He steps back to inspect the result and abruptly sneezes loud enough to echo through the chamber. Sorry, he mutters. These walls are dusty enough to pickle a lung. Joke 2. At your feet, a worker lights another oil lamp, placing it on a ledge. The flame dances gently, illuminating rough surfaces. The walls look alive, breathing with shifting shadows. Your mind wanders for a moment. If anyone wanted to feel the weight of eternity, this room would do it. Suddenly, the quirky tidbit arrives. A young helper whispers to you, "Careful of the corners. Some people say spirits get trapped where stones meet. Don't stare too long, or you might see someone staring back." He says it so seriously you have no idea how to respond. You settle for a polite nod and a mental note not to stare at any corners today. Deeper inside, a group of overseers begins a heated conversation. They argue about the intended angle of the ascending corridor. One insists the slope should be mathematically perfect. The other says alignment should follow celestial markers. This is your scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether internal angles reflect solar alignments, structural convenience, or a combination of ritual symbolism and engineering practicality. The argument gets loud enough that one mason taps his chisel on a stone and mutters, "If they argue any harder, the walls will collapse out of fear." Joke 3. Dry as the desert outside. You follow the engineers up a steep incline where more blocks wait. The passage narrows again, this time so tightly you must turn sideways to pass. Sweat gathers on your forehead. The flickering lamplight makes your shadow stretch and twist along the walls like some ancient glyph come to life. At one point you pause to catch your breath. The air tastes of limestone, oil smoke, and your own exhaustion. You tilt your head back, and for a brief, stunning moment, you realize the ceiling stones above you weigh dozens of tons, held in place by nothing but geometry, manpower, and trust. You swallow hard. No wonder builders walk carefully here. Further in, a small group of workers applies plaster to guide the placement of future stones. One spreads the mixture with a wooden paddle, humming off-key. Another mixes more plaster in a bowl, complaining that the heat makes it dry too fast. You assist by holding up a long leveling rod while the engineers check vertical alignment. "Steady," the engineer murmurs. "Even a slight shift now means trouble later." Your arms tremble, but you keep them steady. When the final checks are done, you're guided back toward the corridor entrance. The sunlight waiting beyond looks blinding. You blink hard as you step outside, almost stumbling into open air. The pyramid's outer walls loom around you again, bright and solid and impossibly huge. You inhale deeply, feeling the weight of stone and silence fade from your shoulders. Inside those narrow chambers you felt the world shrink. Out here you're reminded just how enormous this monument truly is, and how much more there is to build. The moment you step back into the open air, the heat hits you like a giant sun-powered fist. It's not even midday yet, but the desert has already decided to cook everyone evenly. Workers, stones, ropes, tools, regrets. Everything. You squint as the brightness floods back into your eyes. The light bounces off pale limestone so intensely it feels like staring at the world's biggest mirror. You lift a hand to shield your face, but the sunlight still manages to sneak through your fingers in little, mocking flashes. Around you, the worksite hums with the relentless rhythm you've come to know too well. Thudding sledges, shouted commands, the scrape of ropes dragging across sand, feet slapping against the ramp in slow, tired waves. You join your crew near the lower terrace, where you're scheduled for another hauling rotation, or as you like to call it, the daily grind that makes your skeleton question all of its life choices. You take your spot near a half-set block as the foreman barks, "Short break, then we move again." He sounds like a man who hasn't believed in short breaks for at least 10 years. The sun climbs higher, sweat beads across your forehead, then races down your temples, then drips off your jaw in a steady rhythm. The dust sticks to it, turning you into a walking clay statue. You wipe your face. The dust returns immediately. You give up. A worker next to you groans, "If I survive today, I'm never climbing stairs again." Joke 1. You snicker and stretch your shoulders, which feel like someone filled them with sandbags. Now the real grind begins. Hours of slow, monotonous labour. This is the part nobody romanticizes in historical documentaries. No aliens, no ancient mysteries, just sheer, mind-numbing repetition under a sun that hates everyone equally. Your team gathers around a block waiting to be moved further up the terrace. You grip the rope again, your palms raw from earlier hauling. Someone beside you applies water to the sand ahead. The smell of wet earth rises, surprisingly pleasant compared to the usual scent of sweat and sun-baked everything. You lean into the rope, your sandals scrape the ground. Your breath synchronizes with the chant leader's rhythm. Heave, ha, heave, ha. The massive block crawls forward like an angry tortoise. You feel the ache in your calves deepen with every inch. The effort becomes hypnotic. Your vision narrows to the rope, the sand beneath your feet, the block inching ahead. Hours blur together. Hauling, bracing, nudging, chanting, sweating, repeating. A water carrier jogs past, panting, pouring water ahead of your path. He slops half the jar onto your foot. "That's for good luck," he says. You raise an eyebrow. "Or maybe I'm just tired." Joke 2. He shrugs and keeps running. The combination of heat, effort, and monotony begins to play tricks on your mind. You start imagining the stone is whispering insults at you. Someone swears he heard a block laugh once, clearly dehydration talking, or ghosts, or dehydrated ghosts. This leads conveniently into the quirky tidbit of the section. A worker swears that the pyramid hums on hot days. "Listen," he insists, holding a hand near the stone. "Hear that? The gods are stretching." You place your ear close to the stone. You hear nothing unless the distant sound of your dignity evaporating counts. The foreman calls for adjustments, stabilizes wedge beams beneath the runner edges. Lever teams shift the angle. You help push, your fingers slipping occasionally on the dusty rope fibers. Someone suddenly yelps, not from injury, but because a beetle crawled up his leg mid-haul. He jumps, shakes his foot violently, and nearly loses his grip. The foreman stares with a look that can only be described as, "If you die, die quietly." You keep moving, slowly, endlessly. The sun climbs higher, shadows flatten. The heat becomes a thick blanket draped over your whole body. Even the breeze, when it appears, feels like a hungry breath. Another crew passes by, hauling a smaller block. They're singing, singing. You watch with disbelief. "How do they have energy for that?" you mutter. One of your teammates shrugs. "Probably new recruits. They still believe in hope." Joke 3. A little later, the midday lull creeps in. The strange sense that time slows down because your body refuses to continue at normal speed. You feel your legs turn into sluggish ropes. Your thoughts drift like sand caught in a lazy breeze. Your hands move, but not because you want them to, just because they remember the routine. The mainstream fact slips in naturally. Most workers hauled stones only a few months a year during the Nile inundation, when farming paused and the state provided food, housing, and paid rations. That meant some crews were seasoned veterans, and others were very obviously not. You spot a group of newcomers struggling with their block. One trips over his own rope and face plants into the sand. He sits up spitting grains and muttering, "I hate sand. It gets everywhere." A timeless complaint, apparently. Meanwhile, the scholarly debate of this section emerges from two overseers yelling at each other near the top of the ramp. One insists that work slows too much during midday heat. The other argues that the project must stay on strict schedule no matter the weather. Historians still argue whether construction hours were strictly regulated or flexed with seasonal heat. Judging by the screaming, no one agreed back then either. Your block reaches the resting point. You drop the rope, chest heaving. Your heartbeat thrums in your ears. You stretch your arms overhead, vertigo tugging at your mind for a moment. The sun swims in your vision like a glowing fish. One of your crew collapses onto the sand, lying spread eagle. "Wake me when the pyramid is finished," he mumbles. You sit beside him, breathing deeply. Below you, the workers' village looks tiny. Above you, the pyramid's slope rises, massive, relentless, and impossibly far from completion. You're tired, you're dusty, you're sweating enough to hydrate a small garden, but you're also strangely proud. Every block lifted today, every inch moved, every chant, every rope burn. It all builds something bigger than any person here. And the day isn't even over yet. By the time the foreman finally calls for the midday break, you feel like your bones have dissolved into warm porridge. The kind that sloshes when you walk. You wipe the sweat from your brow, again, and realize your entire face now feels like it's wrapped in a crunchy layer of dried dust. Congratulations. You're officially becoming one with the desert. The ramp levels out into a wide terrace, where workers gather beneath the pyramid's growing shadow. You follow your team into that slice of blessed shade, stepping into the cool like a man crossing into the afterlife. For a moment you simply stand there, eyes closed, letting the sudden temperature drop wash over your overheated brain. Someone beside you sighs dramatically. "If the king wants this pyramid any taller," he mutters, "he can carry the next block himself." Joke 1. Everyone within earshot hums polite agreement. Lunch is a simple affair, but miraculous in its timing. You head toward the food distribution area, just a few baskets, jars, and a very overworked cook, whose expression says he'd rather be anywhere else. He ladles out a bowl of lentil stew, thick and warm, though the word warm is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. You take a chunk of bread, a couple of figs, a handful of onions, and another mug of beer that's more bread than drink. The shade of the pyramid stretches across the eating space. It's a strange feeling, sitting at the foot of a structure that will someday tower over history, knowing you helped drag part of it uphill with your own screaming muscles. You settle on a flat stone, resting your back against a block that hasn't been placed yet. The surface is cool, smooth, comforting. You savor the moment. Around you, conversations bloom like desert wildflowers. One man insists his morning block was cursed because every time they tried to move it, a vulture circled overhead. Another claims he saw a foreman trip earlier, but is afraid to laugh about it until the protective gods clock out for the day. A third brags, falsely, that he carried a block 50 steps alone. His friends let him keep the fantasy because it's lunchtime and nobody wants drama when eating stew. Your crew eats in companionable silence for a while. The only sounds are chewing, the clink of pottery, and relieved groans. Now for the mainstream fact. Archaeological remains show that Giza workers received hearty rations. Bread, beer, onions, sometimes fish or meat. Far better than the stereotypical slave diet. The state had every reason to keep labourers fed, hydrated and functional, even if you currently feel like a wilted piece of papyrus. A young worker sits beside you, panting. "This stew tastes like it's been boiled since the reign of Sneferu," he says. Joke 2. You laugh, though honestly, he's not wrong. Across the terrace, a group of haulers relax beneath a makeshift awning. One reclines with his head on a folded linen cloak, using a plumb line. As a bookmark in some tiny papyrus scroll he's too tired to read. Another worker snores loudly enough to attract two curious goats from the village below. You look upward and see the pyramid's unfinished slope towering above, the sunlight bright against its pale stone. It feels surreal, eating lunch beneath something you've been helping inch upward all morning. You stretch your legs and lean back farther, letting the stone behind you support your weight. A quirky tidbit drifts your way from an older mason. Apparently some masons swear the pyramid's shadow at midday brings good luck. They say sitting inside it realigns your car, your spiritual double, like stretching your soul's legs. You don't know if that's true, but it definitely feels nicer than sitting out in the sun being roasted like a sacrificial goose. Nearby, two overseers begin a heated discussion that becomes your scholarly debate of the section. They argue about whether the pyramid's lunch breaks should remain as long during the hotter months. One insists workers need rest or production slows due to heat exhaustion. The other argues that the king's schedule does not pause for the sun. Historians still debate how strictly organised labour hours were, and here you are listening to the ancient HR department argue in real time. As the debate escalates, your team quietly shifts farther away, because no one wants to be volunteered for anything when overseers get fired up. You focus on your snack. A couple of figs, chewy and sweet. You savour them slowly. Someone nearby complains about having sand in his stew. Another shrugs and says, "If you don't taste sand, is it even a Giza lunch?" Joke 3. Eventually you stretch out fully, lying flat on the packed sand. The shade feels heavenly. A tiny breeze brushes your ankles. You close your eyes, listening to the murmur of workers resting. The sounds blur, chatter, soft laughter, clinking jars, the distant rhythmic tap-tap-tap of masons who refuse to stop working. You breathe deeply. The air tastes like beer, dust and onions, but also like a brief moment of peace. You let your muscles unwind, let your thoughts drift, let your heartbeat slow. Somewhere in the distance, someone strums a simple tune on a string instrument. Someone else hums along softly. A small flock of birds rides the warm updrafts above the pyramid. For these few precious minutes, you're not hauling, not sweating, not straining. You're simply a person sitting in the shade of a monument in progress, sharing food, air and exhaustion with hundreds of others who are building something larger than themselves. Then, naturally, the foreman claps loudly. Break time is over. Workers sit up, groaning like old doors. You push yourself to your feet, knees cracking, you dust off your kilt, grab your rope and sigh. Back to work. Always back to work. You follow your crew down the long sloping path toward the workers' village as the sun finally begins its slow drop toward the western horizon. The day's heat, still fierce, still clinging to your skin like honey left too long in the sun, starts to ease. Just barely. Enough that you no longer feel like your brain is simmering. Enough that the breeze actually exists again. Your sandals kick up soft bursts of dust as you walk. Behind you, the construction site continues its thudding, scraping, chanting rhythm, but the intensity of earlier hours fades as the foremen call out the evening rotations. A few teams still haul the last blocks of the day, but for most workers, including you, this is the long-awaited retreat into the village. You rub the rope burns on your palms, your arms feel like warm noodles, your shoulders ache in strange, specific places you didn't know muscles could hide. A worker beside you groans, "I swear these ramps get steeper every day." Joke 1. You nod sympathetically, even though you know the ramps don't move, you just get more tired. The village spreads below like a patchwork of mud brick rectangles, narrow lanes, clay ovens, dusty courtyards, animal pens and communal workshops. Smoke rises lazily from evening cook fires. The smell of baking bread and grilling fish drifts in the wind, a smell far more powerful than any call to prayer. As you reach the main entrance, the familiar sounds greet you. Children shouting, goats bleating, someone arguing about whose turn it is to fetch water, someone else playing a simple tune on a reed flute. Home. Not luxurious, not clean, not private, but home. You step inside the long workers' barracks you share with dozens of others. The doorway is low enough that you instinctively duck. Inside, the air is warm, thick with human presence, but comforting after hours of punishing sun. Your sleeping mat, woven reeds flattened by years of tired bodies, waits for you along the wall. You drop your tools beside it with a soft clatter. Your back cracks in 17 places. You feel relief and pain at the same time, which is becoming your new normal. Around you, co-workers settle in. One massages his calves. Another removes his sandals and inspects a blister the size of a date. Someone else tries to clean limestone dust out of his hair, but only succeeds in making it puff up like a startled cat. Inside the barracks, conversations blossom like nighttime flowers. A group recounts the day's accidents, 2 near misses, 1 bruised foot, and a sledge runner that snapped in half. Another group debates whether the king will truly be buried inside the pyramid, or if it's all just symbolic theatrics. One worker proudly announces he didn't faint today. His friends applaud sarcastically. The mainstream fact arrives naturally. Archaeological digs at Giza uncovered well-organised workers' housing, complete with bakeries, storage rooms, sleeping galleries, and surprisingly decent living conditions for state labourers, not the slave pits people once imagined. After dropping your tools, you head toward the communal washing area. It's basically a line of large ceramic jars filled with water that's been sitting in the sun. Warm, slightly gritty, questionable, but water nonetheless. You splash your face, feeling the grime loosen. Some men strip to rinse their whole bodies, others wipe down with damp cloths to avoid evening chills. A friend beside you, still crusted with dust, sighs, "If the gods wanted us clean, they wouldn't have invented limestone." Joke 2. On your way back toward the barracks, you pass through the central market lane, a small, lively stretch where workers trade, barter and gossip. One man sells amulets carved from scrap stone. Another offers honey cakes that smell divine and cost more than your entire ration allotment. A young woman sharpens tools for extra bread rations. A teenager sells woven cords. You buy nothing today, your arms are too tired to even bargain, but you enjoy the bustle. You linger near a potter's workshop. Fresh clay cups sit cooling on a board. The potter, an older man with hands permanently coated in clay, waves at you. "Long day?" he asks. You laugh. "Shorter than the one coming tomorrow?" He chuckles and returns to shaping a new jar on his wheel. Next, you move toward the communal courtyard where evening meals simmer in large pots. Tonight's dinner, a hearty mix of lentils, garlic, barley, and a few treasured bits of dried fish. The steam rising from the pot smells like heaven after working in the dust. You grab a bowl, fill it, and sit with your gang near a low mud brick wall. The first bite sends warm relief down your spine. Around you, people eat, chat, argue, laugh, complain, and occasionally fall asleep mid-chew. One man launches into a story about how he once worked on a temple site where they drag statues instead of blocks. "Statues complain more," he claims. "Their faces watch you suffer." Joke 3. You all groan, but you smile. The quirky tidbit of this section appears in the form of a woman handing out herbal sachets to tired workers. They're filled with mint, myrrh, and crushed lotus petals. She swears they help you sleep deeply and scare away bad dreams. Everyone takes one politely. You tuck yours into the fold of your kilt, wondering if it'll help at all, or just make your dreams smell fancy. After dinner, you return to the barracks, where evening conversations soften into low murmurs. A few workers carve tiny symbols into spare stones, practice hieroglyphs. Others gamble with knucklebones. Someone tells a ghost story from the quarries. Someone else hums quietly while braiding rope. At one point, two men begin arguing about whether the king's tomb should have a slanted or flat ceiling. This becomes the scholarly debate of the section, mirroring a real historical question. Historians still argue about symbolic versus structural reasons for the changing chamber designs. The men debate fiercely for a few minutes, before giving up and deciding both options sound like too much work. Finally, exhaustion settles heavily on your shoulders. You stretch out on your reed mat, using your folded kilt as a pillow. The barracks are warm, but the evening breeze flows gently through the doorway, cooling the room just enough. Someone snores softly. Someone mutters as they drift into sleep. Your eyelids grow heavy. You survived another day under the sun, under the ropes, under the stones, and tomorrow the pyramid will rise just a little higher because of you. You wake before dawn again, joints creaking like old wooden doors, but today carries a small, quiet promise, the rumour of better food. Not a feast exactly, but something more exciting than the usual lentils and bread routine. And in a world where your daily activities include hauling multi-ton blocks uphill in the sun, better food counts as extremely high-level motivation. You shuffle through the awakening village, feet scuffing the dusty ground. Children dart between workers, chasing a rag-stuffed ball. Smoke curls from clay ovens where bakers already slap dough onto heated surfaces. The smell, warm, yeasty, faintly sour, wraps around you like a comforting blanket. When the morning rations are handed out, you notice a difference. The bread is a little fluffier, the beer is a bit thicker, and someone has added herbs to the stew pot. One man lifts his bowl, inhales deeply, and dramatically whispers, "By the gods, flavour." Joke 1. Half the workers around him clutch their chests in pretend shock. You take your ration and sit with your crew at the edge of the lane. The first bite of stew tastes slightly spiced, which is enough to convince several workers that today will go smoothly, even though the pyramid has never cared about optimism a day in its life. The mainstream fact arrives with the food itself. State workers at Giza regularly receive generous rations, including bread, beer, garlic, onions, sometimes fish or goat meat. Far from the starving slave myth. High-calorie diets were essential because you burned more energy hauling stones than a modern athlete does in a marathon. A scribe passing by adds to the rumour mill. If production stays high this week, he says, there might be a festival ration soon. a festival ration, the holy grail of pyramid-building cuisine, extra meat, better beer, possibly honey cakes. The thought alone lifts spirits like a gust of wind beneath tired wings. As the sun rises, work begins, but not with the same grinding misery as yesterday. You can feel the slight uptick in energy everywhere. On the ramp, workers hum while pulling ropes. A few even attempt singing, though it sounds like a group of donkeys learning to chant. One man improvises a song about bread so passionately that another worker tells him he should become a priest of the grain goddess. Joke 2 met with a roar of laughter. At midday, instead of collapsing instantly, you actually feel alert, enough to notice the food scene more clearly. People gather near the long communal tables where cooks have laid out today's rations. Lentils, bread, dried fish, onions, but also, yes, pieces of roasted goat. Small pieces granted, but deliciously promising ones. You savour your portion slowly, letting the rich, smoky flavour linger. Someone beside you tries to trade 3 onions and a fishing hook for your goat bit. You decline politely. You're not a fool. Nearby, a group of workers discusses how rations differ depending on job role. Haulers get more calories. Masons get slightly higher status meals. Water carriers get extra hydration. A few men speculate whether scribes get dessert. One insists scribes secretly dine on figs and honey every night. Another shakes his head and mutters, "Scribes only eat ink and judgment." Joke 3. After lunch, you wander past the marketplace lane where extra food items sometimes appear. A woman sells small pyramids of crushed salt. A fisherman offers a basket of tiny dried river fish. Someone else sells pickled cucumbers that smell sharp and vinegary. Then comes today's quirky tidbit. A man at a stall proudly displays a giant garlic bulb, claiming it came from a blessed field and will make you stronger than a bull for tomorrow's hauling shift. You're tempted. Garlic helps with muscle pain, at least according to Egyptians, and you can always use extra strength. But you choose not to spend your ration tokens, mostly because you suspect his blessed field is just his backyard. You return toward the barracks as the sun dips, and the cooks prepare the evening meal. The air fills with savoury smells, stew, roasted onions, hints of spice. Workers gather around large pots holding wooden bowls like worshippers awaiting divine blessing. 2 overseers stand nearby arguing, loudly, about whether the workers are receiving too many onions. One claims onions are essential for endurance, the other insists onions cause too much stomach trouble. That's your scholarly debate for the section. Historians still argue whether the huge amounts of onions recorded in ration lists were for nutrition, natural antibiotics, or simply because they were cheap and abundant. You slurp your evening stew, rich and warm, feeling the fatigue of the day settle into your bones again, but not in the crushing way it sometimes does. Good food makes a difference, a huge one. After dinner, the mood in the village shifts. Men laugh louder, children run freely. Someone starts drumming on an overturned pot. Someone else claps along. A tiny celebration bubbles up, not a formal feast, but a small expression of joy after surviving another day. You stretch out near the barracks doorway, stomach full, energy stable, heart strangely light. You think, maybe tomorrow won't crush me completely, which, in pyramid building terms, is basically optimism. As night gathers, you lie down on your reed mat, hands resting on your chest, the taste of garlic and roasted goat lingering on your tongue. Workers murmur around you, the village alive with quiet contentment. Yes, food matters, comfort matters. Moments like this, small, warm, fleeting, carry you through the endless stone and sun. You breathe deeply. Another day awaits, another meal, another climb. But for now, you're fed, you're resting, and the night is cool. Morning comes with a stiffness that feels new even though it isn't. You've carried the same aches for weeks, maybe months, but today they seem sharper, like someone sanded your joints while you slept. When you stretch your arms above your head, your shoulders crack loudly enough for the man beside you to flinch. He mutters, "Careful, you'll summon the gods with that noise." Joke 1. You give him a slow blink in return. You step outside the barracks into the cool dawn. The village stirs around you, clay ovens glowing, children scampering barefoot, workers squinting into the rising light. You rub the back of your neck, feeling the familiar tightness there. It's time, past time really, to visit the workers' clinic. The Egyptians didn't call it a clinic, of course. It's just a set of rooms near the central lane, where healers, herbalists, and temple-trained practitioners tend to the constant stream of cuts, strained muscles, headaches, heat exhaustion, and rope burns that pyramid building creates. Not glamorous, but essential. You cross the lane toward the small complex, mud brick rooms with painted symbols outside, plants, spiral lines, a stylized eye of protection. A faint scent of herbs, strong, minty, dusty, floats through the doorway. Inside, the space is bustling. Workers sit on reed mats, waiting their turn. One man has a wrapped hand, another holds a swollen ankle, a third looks suspiciously like he's pretending to be hurt to avoid hauling today. The healer eyes him with deep skepticism. You sit where indicated and wait. The healer, a middle-aged woman with steady hands and the piercing gaze of someone who's seen every kind of injury, approaches you. "What hurts?" she asks. You gesture vaguely at, "Well, everything." She nods knowingly. Pyramid builder, classic case. She begins examining your hands first. Rope burns, blisters, tiny cuts full of limestone dust. She takes a small clay pot, scoops out a paste that smells like pine resin and turmeric, and smooths it onto your palms. The coolness sinks in with a blessed sigh of relief. This is your mainstream historical fact of the section. Egyptian medical practice was remarkably advanced for its time. Herbal remedies, bandages, splints, wound cleaning, and salves mixed from honey, a natural antibacterial, resin, and plant matter. They may not have had antibiotics, but some treatments came surprisingly close. The healer then presses along your shoulders and neck. You wince. She clucks her tongue. "You slept wrong," she says, then adds, "And you worked wrong, and you breathed wrong." You don't argue. She mixes another salve, this one smelling strongly of mint and ground lotus root, then rubs it briskly into your sore muscles. You hiss through your teeth at first, but the relief blooms slowly like warm water spreading under your skin. While she works, another patient across the room tells a story about a man who once cured his back pain by letting a temple cat sit on him for an hour. "The cat absorbed the pain," he claims proudly. Joke 2. You question the biology behind this, but admire the creativity. Then comes the quirky tidbit. An apprentice healer explains that some workers believe setting out onions under the moon during a full lunar cycle can pull pain out of the body overnight. She says this with complete seriousness. You nod politely and decide not to ask follow-up questions. After your treatment, the healer wraps your wrists in soft linen strips to reduce friction from the ropes. "Don't soak these," she warns. "The moment they get wet, they turn into mush." You thank her anyway, grateful even for temporary comfort. As you stand to leave, you hear raised voices in the next room. Two healers are arguing over how best to treat heat exhaustion. One swears by constant water intake and shade, the other insists on a honey and herb tonic followed by rest. Their disagreement becomes your scholarly debate. Historians still argue how systematic ancient Egyptian medicine truly was. Structured protocols or case-by-case intuition. Listening to these healers, it sounds like both. You step back into the bright sunlight, blinking. The salves start working quickly. The stiffness eases bit by bit. The linen wraps feel snug, secure, strangely empowering, as if your hands suddenly belong to someone less fragile. Work calls, of course. It always does. But for the first time in days, maybe weeks, you feel manageable, functional. Before heading back to the ramp, you stop by a small stand outside the clinic. An elderly man sells protective amulets carved from leftover stone fragments. "For pain," he says, offering you one shaped like the hieroglyph for life. Or for luck, whichever runs out first. You smile, buy the amulet with a ration token, and tie it loosely around your wrist. Superstition? Maybe. But when you've hauled stones bigger than your house, you accept help from any source, medical, mystical, or otherwise. As you walk toward the base of the pyramid, a breeze picks up. The pain in your shoulders fades enough that you can take a deeper breath. The linen wraps soften the bite of every movement. You feel almost restored. Almost. Your foreman spots you approaching and raises an eyebrow. "Feeling better?" You nod. "Good," he says. "We've got a heavy one today." Of course, they're always heavy. But today at least you have salve on your hands, mint on your skin, and a tiny carved amulet whispering reassurance against your wrist. You square your shoulders. Time to work again. By the time the sun climbs past the early morning haze, the workers' village is fully awake, and so are the small shrines scattered throughout it. Before heading back to the ramps, you pass one of them, a simple alcove carved into a mud brick wall, holding a tiny clay figure of a protective deity, with a wide grin and a potbelly. Someone left fresh bread at its feet. Someone else tucked a sprig of mint behind its ear. The statue looks like it's having a pretty good morning. You pause for a moment, bow your head, and offer a quick, silent request. Please let today be free of falling stones, sprained ankles, or foreman yelling. A co-worker beside you snorts. Ask for lighter stones next time. Joke 1. You elbow him lightly and continue walking. Religion here isn't something you do only in temples. It's part of daily life, woven into the smallest routines. Before heading uphill, crews often stop by these miniature shrines to murmur prayers, tie bits of cloth to wooden posts, tap statues for good luck, or pour a splash of beer onto the ground. Not because anyone expects a grand miracle, but because when you're climbing ramps with multi-ton blocks, even the slightest divine nudge sounds comforting. At the base of the pyramid, a priest from the nearby chapel performs a quick purification ritual. He sprinkles water over the teams and chants softly, asking the gods to steady your hands, strengthen your legs, and keep your rope from fraying at the worst possible moment. Workers stand respectfully, though one man whispers, "Hope he blessed the ramps too." Joke 2. The mainstream fact of this section settles naturally. Archaeological evidence shows small chapels and offering tables near workers' villages at Giza, hinting that daily rituals and protective prayers were part of the construction culture. Not constant grandeur, but personal devotions for safety and luck. You climb the ramp toward your assigned area. The pyramid's slope rises before you, glowing pale under the morning sun. The chants of other crews drift through the air like distant echoes. A few workers carry small amulets tied to their belts. Bess for protection, Taweret for health, Wadjet for safeguarding the eyes. You touch the amulet you bought yesterday, still tied loosely around your wrist. The little glyph for life feels cool against your skin. Your foreman gathers the crew for a quick check-in. Today we're setting blocks on the east face, he says, pointing toward the side illuminated brightest by the rising sun. Precision work, no daydreaming. Precisely the moment your mind begins to wander. As the hauling begins, you notice a small group of workers stepping aside to leave offerings in a shallow depression between stones. Crumbs of bread, a splash of beer, a few fragrant herbs. For the spirits who guard the stones, one whispers, or for the stones themselves. You never know how literal people are being. That's the quirky tidbit. Some workers believe every stone has a protective spirit, and leaving small offerings keeps them cooperative. Up the ramp near the mid-tier, a larger shrine has been set up. A painted wooden stela depicting Hathor with her cow horns and sun disk. A garland of papyrus strands hangs around it. Workers touch the base of the stela before passing by. You do the same, almost unconsciously. The wood is warm beneath your fingertips. A water carrier whispers beside you. Hathor likes music, you know. Maybe sing to her. You shake your head. I'd rather not offend anyone today, mortal or divine. The hauling rhythm begins. Chanting echoes off stone walls. Sweat beads instantly. The block moves with steady resistance. Your hands, still wrapped from yesterday's clinic visit, feel supported. Less pain, more control. At one point, the sledge catches on a rough patch of stone. The block jolts dangerously to one side. A gasp rises from the team. A worker quickly slams a protective wedge under the runner, stabilizing it. Everyone exhales at once. Then someone says, "The gods held their breath with us." You smile because you kind of believe it. Farther up the slope, a priest stands with arms raised, muttering a protective blessing directed toward the highest tiers. He traces symbols in the air with graceful movements. One of the workers watching him mutters, "He's arguing with the gods again." Joke 3. During a brief break, you sip water and join a small group resting near a flat stone ledge. One worker tells a story about how, in his hometown, priests used to interpret crack patterns in pottery as messages from the gods. Another insists dreams hold clues to upcoming accidents. A third says that if a black cat crosses your path on the ramp, you absolutely must stop and tie your sandals before proceeding. Superstition? Maybe. But in a world where heavy stones, shifting sand and heat stroke loom constantly, small rituals offer reassurance, comfort. control. Near the end of the morning shift, a heated discussion erupts between two overseers and a priest. It becomes the scholarly debate of the section. Should the internal corridor placements follow astronomical alignments, or purely structural needs? One argues the pyramid should point towards sacred stars connected to the king's afterlife journey. Another counters that the angles must prioritize stability, or the chambers risk collapse. You watch the argument with interest and exhaustion. Eventually, the foreman herds your team away before anyone volunteers you to move blocks inside again. As the sun reaches its peak, you help set the final block of your rotation. The stone slides into place with a satisfying thud. A moment of silence follows, just a breath, before the next command echoes through the air. But before you lift the rope again, you touch your amulet, whispering a quick thanks to whatever powers might be listening. Your arms ache, your skin stings, your throat is dry. But something inside feels steadier, protected, anchored by the rituals woven through your day. You breathe in deeply, the air hot and heavy, and continue climbing. Always climbing. The first sign that something is wrong is the silence. Not complete silence. This is a pyramid construction site after all, but a sudden pause in the usual rhythm. A gap between chants, a space where the constant thud of sledges should be. You feel the hairs on your arms rise before you even understand why. Your crew is making its way along the mid-tier ramp, ropes in hand, preparing to shift positions for the next block. You're tired? Yes. Exhausted enough to walk with your eyes half-lidded, but even in fatigue, your senses pick up when the energy of several hundred workers changes in an instant. Someone ahead of you stops abruptly. Someone else whispers, "Wait, don't move!" You freeze, rope taut in your hands. Then you see it. A block, huge, freshly quarried, still rough on its underside, tilting forward on a higher slope. The sledge runner beneath it must have cracked. Maybe the sand wasn't watered. Maybe a wedge slipped. Maybe the gods blinked at the wrong time. Whatever the cause, the block teeters, wobbling like it's deciding whether it wants to roll. A worker near it shouts, "Brace it! Brace it now!" Men scramble for levers. A foreman screams orders. Someone slips. Someone else lunges. Your stomach twists. The block tips one dreadful inch forward. Then, thunk! It slams back down onto the sand, stopping just short of the edge. Collective breath is released all at once. You feel your knees soften with relief. A man nearby mutters, "I need to sit down before my soul leaves my body." Joke 1. But the scare isn't over. As crews rush in to secure the block, the ramp surface beneath it shifts subtly. A small avalanche of gravel trickles over the side. Everyone watches with wide, fearful eyes. The foreman of that team kneels beside the damaged runner, inspecting the break. "The wood's rotten," he growls. "We should have replaced these last week." His voice carries bitterness, a dangerous mix of guilt and fear. This is the harsh truth of pyramid work. Accidents happen, near misses, close calls, sometimes worse. And every worker knows someone whose name is remembered only as the one crushed on the ramp. Your mainstream historical fact arrives naturally. Archaeological evidence shows that workers at Giza suffered injuries common to heavy labour, broken bones, crushed limbs, severe sprains, and that some were treated in on-site clinics, while others likely didn't survive. These job hazards were real, constant and terrifying. Your foreman calls everyone back into formation. Work must continue, carefully, slowly, but continue. The pyramid doesn't stop growing just because human hearts skip a few beats. As repairs begin, you help clear debris from the edge of the ramp. The sun roasts your back. Dust coats your mouth. A water carrier pours a line of water ahead of your path, glancing nervously uphill as if expecting the block to start moving again purely out of spite. Someone beside you whispers, "That block almost took 10 men with it." Another replies, "If it had, we'd have blamed the ramp, not the gods." Joke 2. The quirky tidbit arrives in the form of a worker, clutching a small amulet of Taweret, the hippo goddess of protection. He presses it to his chest and mutters, "This little lady saved us today." His friend rolls his eyes but also touches the amulet just in case. Once the damaged sledge is replaced and the sand is rewatered, the teams cautiously reassemble for the next haul. The chant leader calls out slowly this time, longer pauses, more breath between commands. "Have. Ha. Have. Ha! The block moves again, but the energy is different now. No one jokes, no one hurries. Everyone watches the ropes, the levers, the sand beneath their feet. You can feel the collective tension. Halfway through the shift, another scare hits. This one's smaller, but still enough to spike your heart. A worker loses his balance and stumbles forward. The man beside him yanks him upright just before he falls under the block's path. When the foreman scolds them, the saved worker mutters, "I wasn't falling, the ground stood up too fast." Joke 3. By late afternoon, with the sun sagging westward, the day's tension shows on every face. Shoulders slump, eyes stay wide, scanning for danger. Voices drop quieter than usual. During a short break, you overhear two overseers debating fiercely, your scholarly conflict for this section. They argue over whether the ramp should be rebuilt more frequently to avoid structural weaknesses. One insists weekly repairs are essential. The other claims the workload is already too heavy. Historians still argue whether ramps were continuously maintained, reconstructed in sections, or entirely replaced mid-project. Watching them yell while gesturing at the still dangerous slope, you think, maybe do both. Like now, immediately. Eventually, as the final light begins turning the stone a soft rose gold, the last block of the shift is secured safely in its resting place. Workers step away quietly, humbled by the day's close call. Your foreman approaches your team, his voice low. "Good work today. Go rest. Tomorrow we reinforce the mid-tier." You nod, feeling the adrenaline finally drain from your limbs. Your hands tremble, not from exhaustion alone, but from remembering the sound of that block shifting, that sickening moment when the world seemed to tilt with it. As you walk back toward the village, the pyramid looms behind you, silent and unbothered. It grows one stone at a time, unconcerned by the fear, sweat, or near misses that shape each day. Your heart steadies. The desert wind cools your skin. Someone beside you whispers softly, "We survived another one," and you whisper back, "Always one more." The next morning begins like most others. Aching limbs, gritty eyes, a bowl of thick beer you drink mostly out of obligation. But the energy in the village feels different, tighter, more alert. Yesterday's near disaster on the ramp has everyone a little jumpier, a little more aware of every creak of wood and shift of sand. Even the foremen look like they slept with one eye open. You head toward the base of the pyramid with your crew, but instead of picking up ropes immediately, you're directed toward a raised platform near the staging area. And waiting there, looming like a hawk on a perch, is a royal overseer. Not your usual local overseer, not the middle management type who carries a reed switch and complains about sand in his sandals. No, this one wears crisp linen pleats, a sash edged in dyed threads, an eyeliner sharp enough to slice bread. He holds a long staff carved with sacred symbols. Behind him, two assistants stand with wooden tablets, ready to record, well, everything. Your foreman nudges your crew forward and whispers, "Behave." You were planning to, but now you're determined. The royal overseer steps forward and surveys the workers with slow, calculating eyes. "The king expects progress," he says, voice smooth and cool. "I am here to ensure the ramps, teams and quotas reflect his divine will." Translation: work faster, sweat harder, no excuses. A man beside you mutters under his breath, "Maybe the king should haul a block and see how divine his back feels." Joke 1. You bite the inside of your cheek to keep from laughing. The mainstream historical fact of the section slots neatly into place. Ancient Egyptian royal projects relied heavily on scribes, overseers, and high-ranking officials who inspected labourers, recorded quotas, allocated rations and enforced standards, creating one of the earliest administrative systems in history. The scribes accompanying the overseer begin walking along the ramp, noting block placements, slope angles, and the number of teams assigned to each terrace. One scribe stops abruptly to measure a gap between stones with his cubit rod. He frowns, makes a note, and mutters something that sounds suspiciously like, "Who placed this block? A blind hippopotamus?" Your foreman turns pale, which is impressive given how much sun he gets. You and your crew follow instructions to stand by your assigned block while officials inspect the area. The ramp still shows signs of yesterday's chaos. Loose stones swept aside, a few splintered wooden wedges, sand darker where water spilled. The royal overseer points at the repaired sledge runner, "Who authorized this repair?" he asks. Your foreman steps forward bravely. "I did, Overseer." The Overseer raises an eyebrow. "Correct, and next time, authorize it sooner." Your foreman exhales quietly. Not quite relief, but not terror either. Then comes the quirky tidbit. One of the scribes carries a tiny clay figurine in his belt, pouch, and periodically taps it for luck. You notice it because every time someone hauls a large block, he touches it and whispers, "Stay upright, stay upright," as if the figurine can prevent gravity from being gravity. Once the officials finish their inspection, hauling resumes, but now with the Overseer watching from his platform like a falcon observing prey, nobody dares to slack. Nobody dares to speak above a whisper. Even the chant leader keeps his rhythm softer than usual. You take your place on the rope again. The linen wraps from the clinic still cushion your palms, though they're slick with sweat already. When the command comes, you lean forward and pull with everything you have. The block slides. Slowly, smoothly, deliberately. An assistant scribe counts each heave aloud and marks progress on his tablet. 2 cubits, 3 cubits, 4. You feel like a grain of sand under a bureaucratic lens. Halfway up the ramp, a small group of priests joins the Overseer. They wear leopard skin cloaks draped over their shoulders and carry incense burners. One priest waves the fragrant smoke toward the workers, chanting blessings for strength and precision. A worker behind you whispers, "Great, now we have divine supervision and administrative supervision." Joke 2. You snort before remembering the Overseer can definitely hear you snort. The hauling continues. Sweat stings your eyes, your muscles tremble. The block inches toward the terrace. You keep your steps steady, mindful of yesterday's trauma. Then the scholarly debate reveals itself in real time. The royal overseer and the high priest begin arguing, quietly but intensely, about the pyramid's layout. One insists the internal chambers must follow precise sacred geometry, tied to celestial pathways. The other insists the corridors must accommodate the structural load more practically. You overhear the priest say, "A slightly shifted axis will disrupt the king's journey to the stars." The overseer counters, "A collapsing chamber will disrupt it more." Historians still argue whether the pyramid's internal design was primarily symbolic, astronomical, or structural. Watching these two, the answer seems to be all of the above plus ego. The block finally reaches its resting shelf. Stabilizers lock it with wedges. The scribe scratches a final mark. Your team steps back, panting, exhausted but relieved. The royal overseer surveys the scene, then nods once. Acceptable. Acceptable. You nearly collapse with joy. After the officials depart, the mood shifts instantly. Foremen relax, workers exhale. Someone nearby mutters, "I'd rather pull 10 blocks than have that man stare at me again." Joke 3. As you descend the ramp at day's end, legs shaking, you look back at the growing pyramid. Today's progress isn't just physical, it's stamped into tablets, recorded in reports, overseen by scribes and priests, and folded into the king's grand vision. Because every stone you place isn't just a block, it's a line in a ledger, a mark on a tablet, a whisper to the gods, a demand from the palace. You're not just a worker, you're a tiny part of a massive machine. Half spiritual, half administrative, all-consuming. And tomorrow, that machine will turn again. You feel it before you see it. The shift in the air that tells you the Nile has changed moods. Every worker on the Giza plateau knows this feeling deep in their bones. The breeze carries a faint coolness, the dust settles differently, and conversations take on a new tone. The inundation season is approaching. The Nile, the lifeblood of Egypt, is swelling again. For most farmers, this means celebration. For workers like you, it means the work schedule is about to tilt, flex, and twist, in ways that only the river itself seems to understand. As you wake in the workers' village, a man stretching beside you groans. "If the river rises any higher, we'll need boats to reach the ramp." Joke 1. You smirk as you pull on your linen kilt. Walking toward the breakfast lanes, you notice subtle signs. The air smells slightly wetter. The clay beneath your feet feels packed with more moisture, and even the goats appear less cranky, though that might just be your imagination. During rations, the cooks whisper about the high waters already reaching flood markers near Memphis. Someone claims the priests saw sacred egrets flying inland, an omen that the water will come early. Someone else declares that last night he dreamed of swimming upstream, and therefore the Nile is angry. No one knows what that means, but they all nod anyway. This morning, your foreman gathers your team and says the words everyone expected. Shorter hauling shifts. We start adjusting for the flood cycle. The mainstream historical fact slides in effortlessly. During the Nile's annual inundation, agricultural work stopped, and large numbers of farmers joined state labour forces, meaning pyramid construction crews swelled in size, work rhythms changed, and supply routes shifted. As you approach the pyramid, you notice larger crowds than usual. New groups of workers arrive from river villages, carrying tools on their shoulders, fresh-faced and unprepared for the cruelty of Giza ramps. One newcomer stares up at the pyramid and whispers, "It's bigger than I imagined." A seasoned worker replies dryly, "It gets bigger every day, unfortunately." You join your regular crew on the lower ramp. The sand feels damp beneath your sandals, a sign the morning mist settled heavily. Your foreman explains the shift in routine. The river brings new hands, but it also slows shipments. We move what we can before the real flooding hits. The new recruits struggle to find rhythm. One tries to pull the rope before the chant begins. Another holds the wrong end of a lever. A third asks if he'll get used to the noise. Your team simply stares at him. He won't. As hauling begins, your muscles protest but obey. The block moves forward with the grunt and grind of practiced effort. The chant leader adjusts the rhythm, slower, more deliberate, to compensate for the new worker's chaotic timing. Heave, ha. Heave, ha. Heave, ha. A recruit beside you whispers, panting, "Is it like this every day?" You nod, then add, "Except hotter, louder, and with more yelling." He looks faint. Joke 2. Around midday, clouds roll in, a rare blessing. The light dims, and the desert wind shifts. Workers stare upward, murmuring. Some point toward the horizon where a thin haze rises. It isn't dust, it's moisture. The quirky tidbit arrives from an older hauler who claims he can smell the Nile rising. "The river speaks through the wind," he says, sniffing dramatically. "And right now, it's telling us to hurry." His friend rolls his eyes and says, "You said that yesterday, and the day before." The old hauler shrugs. The river talks a lot. As the clouds thicken, your team shifts tasks. Some help move blocks already on the terraces. Others assist with reinforcing the ramps, packing damp sand, adding rubble, smoothing pathways where water may collect during heavy humidity. You help replace worn ropes, tying the braids tightly, fingers moving in familiar knots. On the terrace above you, two overseers are in heated discussion. Their voices echo down the ramp. One points toward the direction of the Nile. "If the flood is higher than predicted, deliveries will delay. We must store more tools and materials now." The other shakes his head. "No, the workers will double in number. We must widen the hauling lanes." They go back and forth, growing louder, arms waving dramatically. This becomes your scholarly debate. Historians still argue how the inundation affected construction, whether it slowed down major phases or supercharged them with extra manpower. From the sound of the overseers, the debate has existed for thousands of years. By late afternoon, work slows naturally as the air gets thick and heavy. Even the pyramid seems to exhale in the shifting weather. You help set one last block in place, wedged, aligned, blessed by a foreman's exhausted nod. The sky dims further. A few workers glance nervously at the clouds. Rain is rare, but the flood season brings surprises. Your foreman dismisses the crew early. "Rest. Tomorrow will be heavier." You walk back toward the village, passing new workers setting up mats, chatting excitedly, unaware of how their enthusiasm will evaporate after one block hauling session. Down in the low lanes, you smell the Nile before you see it, a richer, earthier scent drifting across the desert. The river is changing everything, and you're about to feel the full force of that change in the coming days. You tighten your grip on your wrist amulet, exhale deeply, and head toward the barracks as the wind cools around you. The river rises, the world shifts, and your work shifts with it. By the next morning, the Giza Plateau feels different. Not because the work has changed, it hasn't. Not because the sun decided to be gentler, it absolutely didn't. But because the people have shifted. The workforce has nearly doubled overnight. New faces, new voices, new rhythms. and with that comes all the subtle social currents that make life on the pyramid ramps more complicated than just hauling stones. You wake to find a stranger sleeping half on your mat. He blinks up at you groggily and says, "Sorry, I thought this was mine." "It's clearly not," you reply. He responds, "I was very tired." You sigh and let it go. Joke 1, unintentional, but a good start to the day. Outside, the village bustles with fresh arrivals. Farmers who joined the labour force during inundation season, craftsmen from nearby gnomes, younger men eager for rations and adventure, and older ones looking resigned before they even pick up a rope. You weave through the crowds, hearing snippets of conversation. "Where do we get tools? Where's the bread queue? What do you mean there are no pillows? What's a foreman? And why is he yelling already?" New recruits always look slightly stunned, like they expected pyramid building to be gentler. Your old crewmates greet each other with weary nods. Bonds formed through sweat, blisters, and shared suffering run deep. But now those bonds must stretch to include new hands, some eager, some clueless, some loud enough to make you question the gods' planning. On the ramp, your foreman tries to organize the mingled crews. You, join rope line. You, lever team. You, stop standing there like a confused donkey. The man looks deeply offended. "I've never been compared to a donkey." Your foreman shrugs. "Aim higher." Joke 2. As the day begins, you can feel the difference. Hauling with a team you know is like moving in practiced rhythm. Hauling with strangers is like dragging a block while someone plays an offbeat drum beside your ear. The rope line jerks unevenly. Someone pulls too early, someone else forgets to brace. Sand flies. A stabilizer shouts, "Left, no, your other left." Still, bit by bit, new rhythms form. Shared grumbling helps. So does mutual encouragement after a hard pull. You start learning names, faces, quirks. The tall guy who hums every time he lifts. The small but terrifying woman who works faster than 3 men combined. The quiet man whose only role seems to be not falling over. An aspiration you deeply respect. Your mainstream historical fact emerges naturally. Archaeologists found evidence of organized crews with names, often humorous or symbolic, like the Friends of Khufu or the Drunkards of the Craftsman's Gang. Pyramid labor was intensely social, and teams formed identities and pride around shared work. Your own team begins jokingly referring to themselves as the Sunburned Souls. Appropriate. Despite the rough start, something beautiful happens by mid-morning. People begin syncing up, chants strengthen, tools pass faster, hands help instinctively. A new worker slips on wet sand, and 3 old hands grab him before he tumbles. He coughs, embarrassed, and says, "I meant to test the sand." Joke 3. During a short water break, your crew sits on the edge of a terrace, legs dangling over the slope. One of the new recruits asks, "How long until this feels normal?" You shrug. "It never feels normal, you just get stronger." Another adds, "And more tired." A third finishes, but we laugh about it more. In the afternoon, tension flares when 2 men argue over hauling rhythm. One blames the other for pulling early, the other claims his sandals slipped. Voices rise, sand kicks up. For a moment you fear a fight. But a veteran hauler steps between them and says, "If you have the energy to argue, you have the energy to pull." That ends the disagreement instantly. The quirky tidbit arrives from a group of young workers who believe wearing matching beads will link their spirits and improve teamwork. You watch as they braid simple strips of cloth around each other's wrists. One offers you a bead. You accept politely, mostly because it's easier than explaining you already have an amulet for luck, protection, and not dropping stones. Later, while you brace a block, you overhear a lively scholarly style debate brewing between 2 older workers. The strongest bonds form from shared suffering, one insists. That is why the King's projects last forever. The other shakes his head. No, bonds form from shared food and beer. Otherwise, we would all have stopped hauling years ago. Historians still argue whether these labour communities were primarily economic, religious, or social units. But on the ramp today, the answer seems clear. They're survival units. By sunset, your muscles ache, your shoulders burn, and your hands throb beneath their linen wraps. But you've gained something invaluable. New allies, new energy, a growing sense that you belong to something larger than your immediate crew. As you walk back to the village, the chatter around you feels warm, even comforting. People swap stories, tease each other, offer to share soap or leftover bread. You pass a small circle gathered around a fire. A newcomer asks nervously, "How do you know who your real friends are here?" A veteran chuckles, poking the fire. "Your real friends," he says, "are the people who don't let you get crushed by the block." Fair enough. When you lie down on your reed mat that night, surrounded by snores, murmurs, and the rustle of linen, you feel it. The strange, quiet pride of belonging to a working family built not from blood, but from grit. And tomorrow you'll haul together again, laugh together again, shout together again, rise together again, stone by stone, tier by tier, bond by bond. The wind is cooler this morning. A small mercy. As you climb toward your assigned ramp, the sky glows a soft pink, and the pyramid's upper tiers catch the light like a massive rising stairway for the sun itself. You squint upward, shading your eyes. You've worked on many levels before, but today you're going higher than you've ever climbed. Your foreman meets the crew at the base of the ascent and announces, "We're working near the top casing levels today. Watch your footing, watch each other, and don't look down unless you enjoy terror." A man beside you gulps audibly. "That's it," he whispers. "I'm quitting gravity." Joke 1. You climb and climb. The ramps grow narrower as they rise. The air thins just a little, not enough to tire your lungs, but enough to make every sound feel crisp. Below you, the village is a cluster of tiny mud brick shapes. Workers look like little dots moving in zigzags. The Nile glints far beyond, curling through the desert like a silver ribbon. And ahead, the top, or at least the top for today, because the pyramid still isn't finished, still growing, still claiming stone and sweat and years. You reach the upper working zone where the blocks are smoother, more precisely aligned. The masons up here work on the fine casing stones, the gleaming outer layer that will one day make the pyramid shine like a fallen piece of the sun. You run your fingers along one stone, it's astonishingly smooth, cool, perfectly angled. "This," a mason says with pride, "is the face the gods will see." He grins at your wide-eyed reaction. And no, you can't lick it. Joke 2. Your job today is to help position the casing stones as the masons finish shaving, fitting, and polishing them. These aren't the rough core blocks you haul on lower ramps. These are the masterpieces, the cap layer stones, the look at our engineering flex stones. The mainstream historical fact fits right in. The Great Pyramid originally glowed with polished Tura limestone casing blocks, so reflective they shone brilliantly in the sun, so bright, ancient writers claimed you could not look at it directly at midday. Your crew lines up near a newly dressed casing block resting on a smooth wooden sledge. Even the sledge is polished, unlike the rougher ones below. Everything here is about precision, perfection, and danger. Because the edges are sharper, the drop is steeper, the sun is stronger, and if something slips, well, your foreman didn't exaggerate earlier. You grip the rope, glance at your teammates, and begin the careful process of hauling the casing stone into its final position near the top tier. Heave, ha! Heave, ha! But this is different from hauling on the lower ramps. You move slower, gentler, like guiding a sleeping crocodile. You don't want it to wake up angry. The block glides with surprising ease thanks to the smoother surfaces and polished runners. The masons guide its angle with subtle hand motions. A stabilizer crouches dangerously close to the edge, bracing with wedges. "Careful," someone murmurs. "One bad step and you'll roll down faster than the block." Joke 3, but nobody laughs too loudly. Too true. As you position the stone at the ledge, workers above you exchange signals. A master mason steps forward to inspect, tracing his fingers along the seam lines, checking for any deviation thinner than a reed spine. He nods once. Perfect. Then he calls for the last step, lowering and locking the stone. Your crew braces as levers lift slightly, sand is cleared and wedges slot in. The block lowers with a deep, satisfying thud, a quiet heartbeat of progress. And then you see it, a near-finished corner of the pyramid, smooth, flawless, gleaming despite the dust. Even in its unfinished state, the upper face looks like it was carved by a single impossible gesture. As you step back, catching your breath, a worker beside you whispers, reverent and awestruck, "We're touching the sky." A quirky tidbit emerges from one of the upper-level masons. He tells you that the higher you go, the more sacred the wind becomes. Wind from the gods, he claims, is stronger near the top. He lifts his chin dramatically, letting the breeze ruffle his hair. Hear it? That's divine approval. You nod diplomatically while trying not to get dust in your mouth. The scholarly debate appears moments later when two architects begin arguing next to a surveying rope, stretched across the top-tier stones. One insists the slope angle must follow a precise mathematical ratio based on sacred proportions. The other insists the angle is determined by structural stress and weight distribution. You don't understand the king's eternal journey. You don't understand physics. You don't understand anything. And you lost your measuring rope yesterday. Historians still argue the same thing today, with the pyramid slopes designed mainly by sacred geometry or by structural necessity. Judging by these two, the answer is yes. As the sun climbs higher, the top-tier stones heat up. You can feel warmth radiating through your sandals. The wind picks up, making the air shimmer. You pause a moment near the edge, just close enough to feel the height, but not enough to feel your stomach drop. Below you, the entire plateau stretches out like a vast living diagram. Workers hauling, masons shaping, water carriers rushing, supervisors shouting, donkeys braying, scribes scribbling. All of it. Tiny. All of it. Connected. All of it leading to this point. Near day's end, your team places the final upper-tier stone of the shift. The foreman wipes his brow, looking more proud than tired. "Look at that," he says softly. "One day the king will see this and call it perfect." You stand beside him, chest rising and falling, sweat drying in the wind. You look at the smooth new face of the pyramid shining softly under the sun, and you think, I put that there. It's not fame, it's not glory, it's not riches. It's something quieter, deeper, solid as stone. The pyramid rises because you rise with it, because your hands place each block, because your legs climb each tier, because your breath joins the rhythm that lifts the world's greatest monument skyward. As you descend the ramps for the evening, your legs trembling, the wind cools your face. You're exhausted, you're proud, and tomorrow you shall climb even higher. You wake before the sun, earlier than usual, earlier than necessary, and for a moment you don't move. You just lie there on your reed mat, staring up at the dim ceiling of the barracks while your breath rises in slow, tired waves. Your body is stiff. Your hands ache beneath the linen wraps. Your legs feel like you've been climbing dunes in your sleep. But today is different. Today is your final day on the Giza plateau. Not forever. No worker ever truly chooses when they leave, but your rotation ends after this shift. When the sun sets tonight, you'll gather your tools, receive your ration allotments, and make your way back to your village along the Nile until the next labour season calls you again. A man beside you sits up, rubbing his face. "Leaving today?" he asks. You nod. He grins sleepily. "Lucky. Spend the whole day enjoying how much everything hurts." Joke 1. You smile and push yourself upright. Outside, dawn stretches across the desert like a slow, golden yawn. The workers' village is quieter than usual. You walk through the lanes slowly, absorbing every detail. The smell of baking bread, the clatter of pottery, the murmur of sleepy voices, the goats already plotting mischief, the familiar warmth rising from sun-kissed mud brick walls. You collect your final morning ration and savour it. Savour everything. The thick beer, the soft bread, the faint onion bite in the stew. Somehow it tastes richer today. Or maybe you're just sentimental from exhaustion. On the climb to the pyramid, the air is cool, almost gentle. The ramps rise before you, crisscrossed with shadows and sunlight. You know every turn of them now, every ridge, every slope, every spot where the sand softens underfoot. The foreman gathers your team and announces the day's task, completing a final line of placement stones along one of the upper terraces. Not the highest, but high enough that the world below looks like a painting. You grip the rope for the first haul, your muscles protest, your palms burn. But the block moves, slow, steady, obedient. Heave, ha. Heave, ha. You breathe into the rhythm. A new recruit stumbles beside you. You catch his elbow before he goes down. He flushes, embarrassed. "Sorry, I thought the ramp was flatter." "No ramp is ever flat," you reply. Joke 2. The morning passes in careful movements, precise teamwork, and the quiet focus reserved for the final stretch of anything monumental. At midday, under the shade of a jutting block, you sit with the crew and take in the view. The Nile shimmering in the distance, the village bustling below, the half-dressed pyramids stretching toward the sky. A mason's chant floats faintly from above. For once, even the foreman looks relaxed. Then comes the quirky tidbit. A worker passing by claims that if you finish your rotation on a day when the wind blows westward, your next season will be lucky. He pinches the air dramatically. Smell that? West wind. Good sign. You sniff. It smells like dust and sweat, but you nod anyway. After lunch, your crew works on the final block of the day, your last block. It slides into place with a deep final-sounding thud, and your foreman claps your shoulder. Well done, he says quietly. Behind him, two overseers argue over whether the next phase of construction needs a full ramp rebuild or just a reinforcement, your last scholarly debate. Even on your final day, the ancient Egyptian tradition of managerial disagreement remains strong. Historians still argue about it too. Some things never change. You descend the ramp slowly, each step a little heavier, a little more meaningful. The workers' village comes into view, alive, loud, imperfect, full of smoke and laughter and exhaustion. Your shift is over. Your rotation is complete. As you walk through the village one last time, your friends wave. A child hands you a piece of dried fig. A mason nods respectfully. A water carrier shouts, "Come back stronger next season," and you smile. Because despite the sun, the sand, the danger, the aching muscles, you will. The day slips quietly into evening as you leave the plateau behind, your steps slow, your breathing easy for the first time in hours. The sun sinks low, washing the desert in soft gold and long shadows. The noise of the village fades into a gentle hum behind you, voices blending with the faint wind drifting through the reeds along the riverbank. You walk toward the water, feeling the cool air gather around your skin like a soft cloak. Each step feels lighter now, the ground beneath you no longer fighting for your strength. The Nile glimmers in the fading light, peaceful and steady, moving with the slow patience only a river that has seen thousands of lifetimes can possess. You stop near the edge and sit, letting your tired body sink into the warm sand. The breeze touches your face, carries your breath, eases the weight in your shoulders. You close your eyes and listen, truly listen to the quiet rhythm of the river, to the far-off sounds of workers settling in for the night, to your own heartbeat slowing, softening, steadying. There is nothing more to lift tonight, nothing more to haul, nothing more to brace or carry or push, only rest. You let the gentle murmur of water fill the spaces in your mind where noise used to be. You imagine the pyramid behind you, massive, patient, rising stone by stone. It will still be there tomorrow, and the day after, and long after your footsteps fade. For now, you allow yourself to breathe, to unwind, to drift. The wind cools, the sky deepens, your body softens into stillness, and slowly, slowly, you let the day slip away like sand falling quiet into the river.